A little boy left $1 on a Hells Angels bike. What he did next melted hearts. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and maple syrup. Noah stood on his tiptoes, pressing a spatula against the pan, the way his mom had shown him. The edges of the pancake were starting to bubble up, which meant it was almost ready to flip. He bit his lip, concentrating hard. "Now?" he asked. Emily glanced over from the counter, where she was pouring coffee. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes, the kind that didn't wash away with sleep. She gave him a tired but warm smile. "Now," she said. He flipped it. The pancake landed a little crooked, but it stayed in the pan. Noah grinned like he had just won something. "Perfect," Emily said, even though it wasn't. She meant it anyway. Saturday mornings used to belong to Jack. He would take over the whole kitchen, cracking eggs with one hand and humming something off-key, while Noah and Maddie sat on the counter watching him like he was putting on a show. The kitchen felt bigger back then somehow. Louder. More alive. Now it was quieter, but they made it work. Emily wrapped both hands around her mug and looked out the small window above the sink. The backyard was still wet from last night's rain. The old tire swing Jack had hung from the oak tree twisted slowly in the morning breeze, empty and patient. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. She looked away. "Maddie's still sleeping?" Noah asked. He slid the pancake onto a plate and handed it up to his mother. "Let her sleep," Emily said softly. "She was up late reading again." Noah nodded, like that made perfect sense. He turned back to the pan and poured another small circle of batter. He was careful not to spill. Maddie's birthday was 4 days away. She was turning 12. Emily had been doing the math in her head for weeks now, turning the numbers over and over like loose change in an empty pocket. The electric bill was late. The car had been making a noise it shouldn't be making. The grocery money was stretched so thin you could almost see through it. She had managed. She always managed. But managing and thriving were two very different things, and lately the gap between them felt wide as a river. "Mom," Noah said. "Huh? Can we get Maddie something good this year?" He said it carefully, the way he said most things. Like he already knew the answer might be hard. "Like something she'd really like." Emily set her mug down on the counter. She looked at her son standing there in his worn sneakers and his faded blue pajama shirt, spatula in hand, eyes full of hope. 7 years old and already so careful with her feelings. "We're going to do our best," she said. "That's what we always do." Noah nodded slowly and turned back to the stove. He didn't push. He never did. They ate breakfast together when Maddie finally came downstairs, her dark hair loose around her shoulders and a thick paperback tucked under her arm. She dropped into her chair and reached for the syrup without looking up from the back cover she was rereading. "Morning," she said. "Morning, Bug," Emily said. Noah pushed the plate of pancakes toward his sister. "I made them," he said proudly. Maddie glanced at the stack. One was lopsided, one was a little dark on one side, and one was shaped vaguely like a boot. She looked at Noah. "They're great," she said, and took the biggest one. Noah beamed. The morning moved along slow and easy the way Saturday mornings do. Emily washed dishes while the kids argued gently over the last of the orange juice. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked at something and then went quiet. Then Emily's phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up and read the screen. Something shifted in her face. She turned slightly away from the kids and pressed the phone to her ear. Her voice went low. The words were short and careful. When she hung up, she stood still for just a moment. Then she turned around with a steady expression and tucked the phone into her pocket. "All right," she said. "We'll go grocery shopping after lunch." The grocery store was bright and loud. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Wheels squeaked against the shiny floor. A toddler somewhere in the cereal aisle was crying about something, and a store employee with a red vest kept announcing specials over the intercom in a flat, bored voice. Noah walked close to his mother. Not so close that he was in her way, but close enough that their arms almost touched. Emily pushed the cart slowly. She held a small notepad in her hand, the kind with the wire spiral at the top. She had written the list out before they left home, each item in neat printed letters. Noah had watched her do it at the kitchen table, her pen moving carefully, crossing things off before she even got to the store. He hadn't asked why. She stopped in front of a display of apples and chose the ones in the sale bin. She checked the price on the little yellow tag, then checked her notepad, then placed 4 apples in a thin plastic bag and set them in the cart. Noah counted without meaning to. 4 apples. Not 6. Not 8. 4. They moved through the store aisle by aisle. Emily picked things up and put them back more than once. A jar of pasta sauce went into the cart and then came out again when she found a cheaper brand 2 shelves down. She chose the store brand butter, the smaller bag of rice, the bread that was marked down because it was close to its sell-by date. Noah watched all of it. He didn't say anything. He just stayed close and helped when she let him, placing items gently into the cart the way she liked, labels facing forward. At the checkout, he watched her lips move slightly as the cashier scanned each item. She was counting. He could tell by the way her eyes tracked the little screen at the end of the belt, the numbers climbing with every beep. She paid with cash. She counted it out from an envelope she kept in her purse, smoothing each bill flat before handing it over. Noah looked at the floor. On the walk back to the car, Emily carried 2 bags in each hand and let Noah carry the small one with the bread inside. He held it carefully so it wouldn't get squashed. The parking lot was warm. The afternoon sun bounced off the hoods of cars and made everything look a little bleached out. Emily loaded the bags into the trunk and stood there for a second with her hand resting on the bumper. Her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her expression softened just a little. She held up one finger to Noah, the way she did when she needed a moment, and stepped a few feet away to answer. Noah climbed up onto the little curb at the edge of the parking space and walked it like a balance beam, arms out at his sides. He wasn't trying to listen. He really wasn't. But the parking lot was quiet, in the way that lets sounds carry farther than they should. "I just don't know what I'm going to do, Renee." Emily's voice was low and tight. "Maddie's birthday is in 4 days, and I can barely keep the lights on." Noah stopped walking. He stood very still on the curb. "She never complains. She never asks for anything, and I can't even get her one decent gift." A pause. Then something that wasn't quite a laugh. It was softer than that. Sadder. "I just want her to feel special." Is that too much to ask? Noah stepped down from the curb. He put his hands in his pockets. His right hand touched something small and crumpled. He already knew what it was. A dollar bill he had been saving for 2 weeks, folded up small from being handled so many times. He stood very still in the warm afternoon sun. He thought about the apples. 4 instead of 8. The bread marked down. The way his mother counted every single dollar. And then a quiet thought settled over him like something gentle and certain. He wanted to do something kind. Emily finished her phone call and slipped her phone back into her pocket. She walked to the passenger side and opened the door for Noah without looking at him. Her eyes were a little red. She blinked fast a couple of times and smiled the kind of smile that is meant to cover something up. "All set, bud," she said. "Let's get home." Noah climbed into his seat and buckled his belt. He didn't say anything about what he had heard. He just looked out the window as she walked around to the driver's side. His right hand was still in his pocket, still touching the dollar bill. He had found it 3 weeks ago, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Emily had asked him to bring a box of his father's old things down from the closet shelf. The box wasn't heavy, But it was awkward, and Noah had held it tight against his chest the whole way down the hallway so nothing would fall out. He had set it on the kitchen table and stood there looking at it for a moment before he opened it. Inside there were small things: a watch with a cracked face, a folded map of a state Noah didn't recognize, a pocket knife with a wooden handle, smooth from years of being held, a few photographs, and near the bottom, tucked into the inside pocket of a faded brown jacket, he had found a $1 bill. It was old, soft from being folded and unfolded many times. The corners were rounded and a little frayed. Wrapped around it was a tiny piece of paper, folded once, the crease worn thin. Noah had opened it slowly, careful not to tear it. The handwriting inside was small and neat. It said, "Pass kindness forward." Noah had read it twice. Then he had read it a third time, out loud in a whisper, just to hear the words. He didn't know who had written it. He didn't know how long his father had carried it. He hadn't asked his mother about it because he wasn't sure why exactly. It felt like something private. Something that belonged between him and his dad, even if his dad was gone. He had kept the dollar and the note together. He carried them in his pocket every day. Now he sat in the car and felt the soft paper between his fingers and thought about what the words meant. Pass kindness forward. Emily pulled out of the parking space and drove slowly toward the exit. She stopped at the stop sign at the edge of the lot and waited for a family with a stroller to cross. Noah looked out his window. That was when he saw them. A row of motorcycles parked along the far edge of the lot, near the hardware store that shared the same strip of pavement. There were 4 of them lined up side by side, big and gleaming in the afternoon light. Noah had seen motorcycles before. He had seen them on the highway and parked outside the diner on Route 9. But these were different. These were enormous. Each one looked like it had been built to take up as much space as possible. Chrome pipes curved along the sides. Wide handlebars stretched out like arms. The seats were low and long and worn dark from years of use. But it was the one on the end that Noah's eyes went to and stayed on. It was bigger than the others, blacker. The paint was so deep it seemed to pull the light into it instead of reflecting it back. The chrome was polished so bright it threw little diamonds of sunlight across the pavement. Leather saddlebags hung on either side, heavy and tooled with thick stitching. A skull-shaped ornament sat at the front, small and deliberate, like a signature. Noah pressed his fingers against the car window. The motorcycle sat there like it owned the space it was parked in, like it had never once apologized for anything. He stared at it. He had never seen anything quite like it in his life. Emily pulled up close to their car and put it in park. She stepped out and opened the trunk, then began lifting the grocery bags one by one from the cart. Noah got out too. He was supposed to help. That was his job. He grabbed 2 of the lighter bags and set them in the trunk without being asked, but his eyes kept drifting back to the motorcycles. He stood there with his hand resting on the edge of the trunk and watched as a man came out of the hardware store. The man was tall and wide across the shoulders, wearing a black leather vest over a dark shirt with the sleeves cut off. His arms were thick and covered in tattoos that ran all the way down to his wrists. His beard was heavy and dark with threads of gray running through it. He wore black boots that hit the pavement with a solid, heavy sound each time he took a step. People noticed him. Noah could see that clearly. A woman near the cart return gathered her purse closer to her body. A man with a young girl steered wide around him without making eye contact. 2 teenagers who had been laughing near the entrance went quiet and watched him pass. The big man didn't seem to notice any of it. Or maybe he was just used to it. He stopped at the black motorcycle on the end. He ran one hand slowly along the handlebar, checking something, the way a person does when they know every inch of something by heart. Then he pulled out his keys and tucked them into his vest pocket and turned back toward the store, like he had forgotten something. Noah watched him go. "Noah, honey, I need one more bag," Emily said from behind him. "Sorry." He grabbed another bag and set it in the trunk. Then he stood still again. He was thinking. He had heard the whispers. He had seen the way people moved away. He had watched that man walk across a parking lot and clear a path without saying a single word. And something about that made Noah feel a quiet ache in his chest. Not fear. Something more like sadness. He thought about his dad. He thought about how his dad used to say that sometimes the people who look the toughest on the outside are carrying the heaviest things on the inside. He thought about the note. Pass kindness forward. Emily closed the trunk and returned the cart to the cart return a few spaces away. She had her back to him for just a moment, keys already in her hand, moving quickly the way she always did when there was still a list of things waiting at home. Noah's hand went into his pocket. His fingers found the dollar bill, soft and worn. He held it for a second. He looked at the black motorcycle sitting quietly at the edge of the lot, big and powerful, and somehow, in that moment, alone. The other bikes had riders who had come back for them. 2 men were already climbing on, pulling on helmets, talking to each other in low voices. But the black one just sat there. Noah thought about the man with the heavy boots and the quiet walk. The man nobody looked at. The man people stepped around. Maybe he needed it more than Noah did. The thought came simply and honestly, the way thoughts do when you are 7 years old and you haven't yet learned to talk yourself out of things. He glanced at his mom. She was checking something in her purse, head down. He moved. His sneakers were quiet on the pavement. He crossed the short distance quickly, his heart beating just a little faster than normal. He reached the motorcycle and stood beside it. Up close, it was even bigger. The handlebar was almost at his shoulder. He could smell leather and something like oil and metal warmed by the sun. He pulled the dollar from his pocket. He reached up and carefully tucked it beneath the handlebar, pressing it snug so it wouldn't blow away. Then he turned and walked back fast, slipping into the passenger seat, just as Emily looked up. Duke Harrison pushed open the hardware store door with one hand and stepped back out into the afternoon sun. He had a small paper bag tucked under his arm. Just some bolts he needed. Nothing special. A 5-minute errand that had turned into 20 because the kid behind the counter couldn't find the right size and had to go look in the back twice. Duke didn't complain. He just waited. He was good at waiting. He moved across the parking lot the same way he always did. Steady, unhurried, eyes forward. He had learned a long time ago that how you move through a space said everything about you. You don't rush. You don't look nervous. You just move like you belong exactly where you are. A woman near a minivan saw him coming and turned away quickly, pretending to search through her purse for something. A teenage boy on a bicycle cut wide around him without being asked. An older couple near the entrance of the grocery store went quiet, mid-sentence, and watched him pass with careful eyes. Duke noticed all of it. He always noticed. He was 45 years old, and he had spent most of those years being the kind of man people crossed the street to avoid. 6 feet, 2 inches tall, 240 pounds, arms built from years of hard work and harder living. The tattoos started at his knuckles and went all the way up past his shoulders. His vest carried the Iron Saints patch on the back, the insignia worn and faded in a way that said it had been there a long time. He wasn't a man who explained himself, not to strangers, not to anybody. He reached his bike and stopped. She was exactly where he had left her. His 1998 Harley-Davidson Road King. Black tank, chrome pipes. Not flashy, not new, but solid and reliable in a way that mattered more to Duke than anything shiny ever could. He had rebuilt her himself from near nothing about 12 years back, spending long nights in the garage with grease on his hands and an old radio playing in the corner. She was the one thing in his life that had never let him down. He set the paper bag into the saddlebag on the left side and snapped it shut. Then he reached for the handlebar. His fingers brushed something. He stopped. He looked down. There was a dollar bill tucked beneath the handlebar, creased and soft and crumpled, like it had been folded and unfolded many times before. It was pressed in tight enough that it hadn't blown away. Somebody had put it there on purpose. Duke stared at it for a moment without touching it. He looked up slowly and scanned the parking lot. A few people were moving between cars. A cart was rolling loose near the entrance. Nothing unusual. Nobody looking at him. Or at least nobody who would meet his eyes when he looked their direction. He reached down and picked up the dollar, held it between two fingers, and turned it over. Plain on both sides. Just an old, tired dollar bill. He straightened up. A low laugh came from somewhere to his left. Two men were standing near a pickup truck about 4 spaces down. They were trying not to stare, but doing a poor job of it. One of them nudged the other when Duke looked over. The second man shrugged and looked away, the corner of his mouth turned up. Duke felt his jaw tighten. He looked back at the dollar in his hand. A balled-up, beat-up dollar left on his bike while he was inside. People looking over and grinning. His first thought was hard and clear and instant. Somebody thought this was funny. He didn't know who. He didn't know why. Maybe it was some kind of joke he was supposed to be embarrassed by. Maybe somebody thought leaving a crumpled dollar on a biker's ride was clever. Maybe they thought he needed the charity. Maybe they just wanted a reaction. His hand closed slowly around the dollar. He was going to find out who left it. Duke turned slow and deliberate. His eyes moved across the parking lot in sections, the way a man does when he's looking for something specific and isn't going to stop until he finds it. He checked the cars closest to his bike first. Nobody crouched between them. Nobody leaning against a bumper pretending to check a phone. He moved his gaze further out, past a row of shopping carts, past a woman buckling a toddler into a car seat, past a man loading bags into a truck. Then he saw him, a little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, standing half behind the back corner of a parked station wagon about 3 rows over, just the one eye and part of a dark-haired head visible, watching. Duke didn't move fast. He didn't call out. He just started walking in that direction, steady and calm, the dollar still held loosely in one hand. The boy saw him coming. His whole body went stiff. He pressed himself flatter against the station wagon like maybe if he got small enough he'd disappear into the metal. His eyes went wide. Duke stopped about 6 feet away. He didn't crouch down or try to make himself look smaller. He just stood there and looked at the boy straight on. Up close, the kid was small and thin, with big dark eyes and a striped shirt that had a small stain near the collar. He looked like he wanted very badly to run, but his feet weren't cooperating. Duke held up the dollar bill between 2 fingers. "This yours?" he said. His voice came out low and even. Not mean, just direct. The boy swallowed. His chin moved up and down once in a small nod. "You put it on my bike?" Another nod. Smaller this time. Duke looked at him for a moment. The boy didn't look away, even though it was clearly costing him something to hold that eye contact. There was something steady underneath all that fear. Duke noticed it. "Why?" Duke said. The boy opened his mouth, closed it again. He glanced sideways just for a second, like he was checking that his escape route was still there. Then he looked back at Duke. "The first heard my mom crying," the boy said. His voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "On the phone. She said she doesn't have enough money for my sister's birthday." Duke waited. "And the first wanted to help somebody," the boy continued. He was talking a little faster now, like the words had been sitting behind a door, and the door had cracked open. "But I only had $1. And then I saw your motorcycle, and everybody looked scared of you, and I thought—" He paused. He pressed his lips together for just a second. "I thought maybe if everybody's scared of you, then maybe nobody's ever nice to you. And maybe you needed it more than we do." Duke didn't say anything. He stood completely still and looked at this small, thin boy in the striped shirt who had just said the most unexpectedly honest thing anyone had said to him in longer than he could remember. The parking lot kept moving around them. Cars pulled out. A shopping cart rattled by. The two men near the pickup truck had long since lost interest and driven away. None of it touched Duke right now. He was looking at the boy and feeling something shift somewhere deep in his chest. Something he didn't have a clean name for. It wasn't quite sadness. It wasn't quite something good either. It was the particular feeling of being seen by someone who has no reason to see you at all, and sees you anyway. "What's your name?" Duke said. "Noah," the boy said. "Noah Parker." Duke gave a single slow nod. Before he could say anything else, a woman's voice called out from 2 rows over. "Noah! Come on, buddy!" Noah glanced back. His mother was standing by an older sedan, her hand resting on the open door, grocery bags already loaded. She hadn't spotted Duke yet. Noah looked back up at him once more. Then he turned and ran toward her, sneakers slapping the pavement. Duke watched the car pull out of the lot and disappear down the road. He looked down at the crumpled dollar still in his hand. Duke's apartment was small and quiet. It sat above an auto parts store on the edge of town, and on most evenings, the only sounds were the occasional truck rolling past on the highway and the low hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Duke didn't mind quiet. He'd lived alone long enough that silence felt normal, expected even. But tonight, the quiet felt different. He sat at the kitchen table with a can of soda he hadn't touched and the crumpled dollar bill laid flat in front of him. The overhead light buzzed faintly. A water stain shaped like a boot spread across the ceiling above the sink. He'd looked at that stain 1,000 times without really seeing it. Tonight he wasn't seeing it either. His eyes were pointed at the dollar. Noah Parker. The kid couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. Thin arms, big eyes, a small stain on his collar, standing half behind a parked car like a rabbit that hadn't quite decided to bolt yet. Scared out of his mind, but still saying what he meant to say. Duke pressed 2 fingers against the table and tapped once. Slow. He'd been called a lot of things over the years. Dangerous. Trouble. Someone to cross the street to avoid. He'd seen grown men look away when he walked into a room. He'd watched women pull their kids a little closer as he passed. That was just the shape of his life. He'd accepted it a long time ago. But this little boy had looked at his motorcycle and seen something completely different. Not a threat, not a reason to be afraid. He'd seen somebody who might be lonely. Duke pushed back from the table and walked to the window. The street below was mostly empty. A dog trotted along the far sidewalk with no particular hurry. 2 teenagers on bikes rolled through the intersection without stopping. He thought about what the boy had said. His mom didn't have money for his sister's birthday. Duke had grown up without much. He knew what it felt like to watch a holiday pass, like it was a regular Tuesday. He knew the particular kind of quiet that fell over a house when something that was supposed to be celebrated just wasn't. He rubbed the back of his neck and turned away from the window. The dollar was still on the table. He picked it up and held it for a moment. It was soft from being handled so many times. The kind of soft that comes from living in a pocket. Duke thought about the fact that this was probably the only dollar that boy had. And he'd left it on a stranger's motorcycle because he thought the stranger needed it more than he did. 7 years old. Duke set the dollar down again. He sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A truck passed outside. The stain on the ceiling didn't change. At some point, his eyes dropped to the dollar again, and he made a decision so quietly that it barely felt like a decision at all. It felt more like something that had already been made, and he was just now catching up to it. He was going to find a gift for that little girl. Nothing that could be traced back to him. He didn't want credit. Didn't want Emily Parker knocking on doors trying to figure out who'd done it. He would find something simple and good, and he would leave it where they could find it. No name. No explanation. He stood up, grabbed his jacket off the back of the chair. There was a small toy store about 8 blocks over that he'd ridden past 100 times without giving it a second thought. He didn't know if it would still be open. He'd figure that out when he got there. He picked up the crumpled dollar and tucked it into his breast pocket, close to his chest. Then he walked out the door. The toy store was called Bella's, and it sat between a closed shoe repair shop and a laundromat on Garfield Street. Duke had seen it 100 times from his bike. He'd never once had a reason to go inside. He pushed the door open just after 9 in the morning. A small bell announced him. The woman behind the counter looked up. She was older, maybe mid-60s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a green cardigan with a small fabric flower pinned near the collar. Her name tag said Rosie. She smiled the way most people didn't when Duke walked into her room. "Morning," she said, like she meant it. Duke gave a short nod and moved deeper into the store. It was small but packed carefully. Shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling. Dolls, books, board games, puzzles with bright pictures on the boxes. A spinning rack of colored pencils near the window caught the morning light and threw little rainbows across the floor. Duke moved slowly, scanning the shelves with his arms crossed. He didn't know what a 12-year-old girl wanted. He barely knew what 12-year-old girls were like. He'd missed most of that with his own daughter, and the thought arrived sharp and fast before he pushed it back down where it lived. He stopped in front of a shelf of books. His eyes moved across the titles. "Looking for something for a young one?" Rosie called from the counter. Duke turned. "Girl, turning 13 soon." Rosie came around from behind the counter without hesitation, like she'd been waiting for exactly this kind of problem to solve. She moved through the store the way someone moves through their own kitchen. Confident, comfortable. 13 is a big one," she said. She tilted her head at a middle shelf. "Does she read?" "Don't know her." Rosie paused and looked at him. Not with suspicion, more with the calm curiosity of someone who'd heard all kinds of stories and wasn't afraid of another one. "Her mom's been having a hard time," Duke said. He kept his voice flat and even. "Just trying to do something good." Rosie studied him for one quiet moment. Then she nodded once, like that was enough, and turned back to the shelf. "Then we'll find her something that feels like somebody cared," she said simply. They spent 20 minutes in that store. Rosie pulled things down and put them back. Duke shook his head at a few and said nothing about others. Eventually they settled on a small, hardcover book with a blue cover and gold lettering, a set of watercolor paints in a wooden box, and a little journal with a bird stamped into the leather front. It wasn't fancy, but it was careful. And somehow, that felt more important. Rosie wrapped everything in pale yellow paper without being asked. She tied it with a white ribbon that she curled neatly with the edge of a scissors blade. Her hands moved with the kind of ease that comes from years of practice. She didn't charge him full price. He noticed the number she wrote on the receipt and looked at her. She shrugged. "Like you said, trying to do something good." Duke paid without argument. The Parker house was on Clover Street, a quiet road lined with old oak trees that arched over the sidewalk like folded hands. Duke had asked around the night before, careful and casual. Nobody thought anything of it. He arrived just before 6 in the morning, when the sky was still the color of dark water, slowly turning gray. He cut the engine half a block away and walked the rest. The porch was small. A potted plant sat beside the front door. A child's rain boot was tucked against the railing. Duke set the wrapped gift down gently against the door. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and placed it on top of the package. It said 3 words, "For someone special." He straightened up, looked at the gift for one still moment, then turned and walked back toward his bike. Duke didn't ride straight home. He told himself he was just taking the long way, stretching his legs, enjoying the cool morning air before the day warmed up. He told himself a lot of things as he turned his bike onto Maple, then cut across 3rd, then looped slowly around until Clover Street appeared ahead of him. He eased off the throttle and rolled along the curb at a crawl. The oak trees were dark and still in the early morning light. A few birds moved in the branches overhead. A sprinkler was going somewhere down the block, clicking softly in the quiet. Duke kept his eyes on the porch as he passed. The gift was still there. He breathed out slowly. Good. He rolled past without stopping, made the loop at the end of the block, and headed home. He made coffee, sat by the window, tried to read a motorcycle magazine, but kept losing his place on the same paragraph without taking any of it in. By 9 o'clock, he was back on his bike. He told himself the same things as before. Long way. Morning air. Clover Street was livelier now. A man walked a dog near the corner. 2 kids on bikes cut across a driveway. A car backed slowly out of a garage 3 houses down. Duke rolled past the Parker house at an easy speed. The porch was empty. He felt something warm and quiet move through his chest. They found it. He kept his eyes forward and kept rolling, one hand resting easy on the throttle. He made it to the end of the block before he let a small breath go through his nose. Not quite a smile. Something close to one. He turned the corner. He didn't mean to come back a third time. But by noon, he found himself on Clover Street again, moving slower than before. And this time, something was wrong. There were 2 police cars parked in front of the house. Duke's jaw tightened. He pulled over and stopped across the street, setting one boot down on the pavement. Emily Parker stood on the front porch. She had her arms folded across her chest, holding herself together. She was talking to an officer who was writing something down in a small notebook. Her face was pale, and her eyes looked red around the edges. A second officer walked slowly along the porch railing, looking down at the ground. A neighbor stood in the yard next door watching everything with wide eyes, and her hand pressed against her mouth. Duke looked at the porch steps, then at the door, then at the spot where he had set the yellow wrapped package just before 6 that morning. Nothing was there. He sat very still on his bike and took it all in. The empty porch, the officers, Emily's face. He had felt good this morning. He had felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. And now that feeling was pulling back fast, like a tide going out, and leaving nothing but cold, wet sand behind. He watched Emily nod at something the officer said. Then she unfolded one arm and pointed down toward the end of the porch, and the officer followed her gesture and wrote something else down. Duke's hand tightened on the handlebar. He turned his head and looked down the street. Empty. Quiet. Whoever had done this was long gone. The packages were gone. The yellow paper, and the white ribbon, and the wooden box of watercolors, and the blue book, and the little leather journal with the bird stamped on the front. All of it. Gone. He looked back at Emily one more time. She was shaking her head now, her lips pressed together, trying hard to keep her face steady. Duke stared at the empty porch for a long moment. Then he pulled away from the curb, slow and quiet, and rode off down the street without a word to anyone. Duke rode without thinking about where he was going. His hands moved on their own, turning down roads he knew by heart. Past the old grain elevator with its faded paint and rusted ladder, past the car wash that had been closed since spring, past the diner, where he sometimes ate breakfast alone in the back corner booth, always facing the door. He wasn't seeing any of it. He kept seeing Emily's face, that pale, tight look she had on her porch. Arms folded, trying to hold herself together while a stranger with a notebook wrote down what she had lost. She hadn't known what was in those packages. She hadn't known one of them was meant for her daughter. She just knew things had been taken from her porch, and she was already a woman who had lost too much. Duke pulled into an empty lot behind the hardware store and cut the engine. He sat there for a minute. Just sat. The guilt was heavier than he expected. That surprised him. He had felt guilt before. Plenty of it. The deep old kind that had settled into his bones years ago and never fully left. But this felt different. This was fresh, sharp. like pressing a thumb against a bruise. He had put that gift on the porch. He had set it there in the dark before the sun came up, thinking he was doing something right. And somebody had come along in the night and stolen it. And because of that, a 12-year-old girl was still going to wake up on her birthday with nothing. He knew it wasn't really his fault. He knew that. But knowing something and feeling something are two different things entirely. And right now, what Duke felt was that he had let that little boy down. Noah had given him a crumpled dollar bill. $1. The kid didn't have anything, and he had handed it over with two hands and the most serious little face Duke had ever seen on a child. And he had said, "Maybe you need it more than we do." Nobody had ever said anything like that to Duke Harrison. Not once in 45 years. He pushed off his helmet and held it against his knee and looked up at the pale sky above the parking lot. He thought about the way the boy had looked at him. No fear in it. Not really, even though Duke could see the kid was nervous. Just this open, honest look. Like it had never occurred to Noah that Duke might not deserve the kindness. Like that part wasn't even a question worth asking. Duke rubbed a hand across the back of his neck. He thought about the gift sitting on that porch. He thought about picking it out the night before, standing in the small toy store under the bright lights, holding a wooden watercolor set, and a journal and a book about birds, because somebody at the hardware store had mentioned offhand that the older Parker girl liked drawing and animals. He had stood there for 20 minutes, making sure he got it right, and now it was gone. He put his helmet back on, buckled the strap, gripped the handlebar. He was not the kind of man who quit after one bad turn. He had made too many bad turns in his life to let one stop him now, and this particular bad turn wasn't going to cost that family anything more. Not if he had something to say about it. He started the engine. The bike rumbled up beneath him, low and steady and sure. Maddie's birthday was in 5 days. 5 days was enough time. Probably. It had to be. Duke pulled out of the lot and swung north, heading away from the quiet neighborhoods and the oak-lined streets and the pale morning quiet of Clover Street. He rode toward the edge of town, where the roads got rougher and the buildings got older, and a faded iron sign hung above a set of wide wooden doors. The Iron Saints Clubhouse. He had some people to talk to. The Iron Saints Clubhouse smelled like motor oil and old coffee. It always did. Duke had walked through those wide wooden doors hundreds of times over the years, and it always hit him the same way. That familiar smell of grease and leather, and something burned on the hot plate in the back corner. It felt like the inside of a place that had seen a lot of years, and wasn't apologizing for any of them. 6 men were scattered around the main room when Duke pushed through the door. Hector sat closest to the entrance, bent over a carburetor with a rag in one hand. He was thick through the shoulders and quiet by nature, the kind of man who spoke maybe 20 words in a day, but meant every single one of them. He looked up when Duke walked in and gave a short nod. Across the room, Ray and Boone were arguing over a road map spread across the big table. Ray was tall and angular, with a silver beard that he kept neatly trimmed, and Boone was the opposite in almost every way, short and wide and loud, with a laugh that could fill a room and a temper that could empty one. They didn't look up right away. Tommy was asleep on the old couch with his boots still on. Sal was making something on the hot plate. Cruz was leaning against the back wall reading a paperback, and he raised 2 fingers in Duke's direction without lifting his eyes from the page. Duke pulled up a chair at the center table. He turned it around and sat on it backwards, arms resting on the top rail. "I need everybody listening," he said. Ray and Boone stopped arguing. Cruz put down his book. Tommy stirred on the couch and blinked slowly at the ceiling. Sal turned around with a spoon in his hand. Hector just kept watching Duke, like he had been watching him since he walked in. Duke didn't ease into it. That wasn't how he operated. "There's a family on Clover Street," he said. "Mother named Emily Parker, 2 kids, a boy named Noah, daughter named Maddie." He paused. "The girl's birthday is in 5 days." The room was quiet. "Their father passed a few years back," Duke continued. "Emily's been carrying everything on her own since then. The mother can't afford a birthday celebration this year." His voice didn't waver, but something behind his eyes shifted slightly. "I want us to throw that girl a real party, the kind she'll remember." Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Boone let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "You serious? Do I look like I'm joking?" Boone studied him. "A birthday party. That's what I said." Ray crossed his arms slowly. "Duke, we're a motorcycle club, not a party planning service." "I know what we are," Duke said. "Then what are we doing organizing kids' birthday celebrations?" Ray's voice wasn't unkind, but it was direct. "How did this even happen?" Duke told them. He kept it simple and straight, the way he always told things. The parking lot, the dollar bill, the little boy with the serious face who thought Duke might need the money more than his family did, the gift he bought and left on the porch, the police cruiser he found there in the morning. When he finished, the room was quiet again. A different kind of quiet this time. Tommy had sat up on the couch without Duke noticing. Sal had set down the spoon. Cruz had not picked his book back up. Hector spoke first. "How much do we need?" he said. Duke looked at him. "To do it right," Hector added simply. Ray unfolded his arms. He looked at the map on the table for a moment, then back at Duke. He gave a slow, reluctant nod. "Okay." Boone exhaled loudly through his nose and scratched the back of his head. 5 days, he muttered. "That's not a lot of time." "No," Duke said. "It's not." Boone looked around at the others. Then he pulled out the chair across from Duke and dropped into it. "Then we better get started." Boone grabbed a thick marker from the cup near the edge of the table and pulled a blank piece of paper toward him. "All right," he said. "Let's figure out what we're actually talking about here." Duke leaned forward. "Food first. We need enough to feed a crowd." "How big a crowd?" Ray asked. "Big enough that the girl feels like the whole world showed up for her." Ray pulled out the chair next to Boone and sat down. "So, we're not talking about a few hot dogs and a sheet cake." "No," Duke said. "We're not." Boone uncapped the marker and wrote food across the top of the page in large block letters. Underneath it, he started a list as the men called things out. Burgers, ribs, potato salad, corn, drinks for kids and adults both. A birthday cake that was actually worth eating. "Not just any cake," Tommy said from the couch. He had fully woken up now and was sitting with his elbows on his knees. "A real one. The kind with the flowers on it." Cruz looked at him over the top of his paperback. "You know a lot about birthday cakes?" "I know what a good one looks like," Tommy said without a hint of embarrassment. A couple of the men smiled at that. Boone kept writing. The list grew quickly. Decorations, tables and chairs, music, plates and napkins and cups, balloons, which Boone announced he would not personally be inflating under any circumstances, generating the first real laughter of the night. "Presents," Hector said quietly. The room settled again. Duke nodded. "Yes, real ones. Not just one thing. Enough so she opens the last one and still can't believe it." Nobody argued with that. Sal tore a second piece of paper from a notepad near the hot plate and started writing a separate list. This one was supplies and setup. Canopies in case of weather. Extension cords for music. Lights if the party ran past dark. Ray tapped the table. "What about the mother? Does she know any of this?" "Not yet," Duke said. "She's going to need to know. We can't show up on that street with motorcycles and decorations without her blessing." "I know that." And she might say no, Ray said plainly. She doesn't know us. Far as she's concerned, we're just trouble with leather jackets. Duke didn't argue the point. He had thought about that already. Then, I'll talk to her first, before anything else goes up or gets delivered. Ray accepted that with a nod. Boone finished the first page and flipped to the back. He drew a rough line down the middle and labeled one column need and the other have. The have side was thin. Between the group of them, they had some folding chairs, a decent speaker system that Cruz kept stored in the back, a string of outdoor lights that Sal had won in a poker game and never used, and a contact at the butcher shop who owed Ray a favor from 3 winters ago. The need side covered most of the page. We can cover some of this ourselves, Duke said, looking at the list. But not all of it. Not even close, Boone said. Duke was quiet for a moment. Then we reach out. Businesses, neighbors, anyone who might be willing to help. Sal set a mug of coffee on the table without being asked, and stepped back. People aren't going to love the idea of us coming to their door, asking for favors. Probably not, Duke agreed. Some of them are going to turn us away before we finish the sentence, Ray added. Some of them will, Duke said, but not all of them. He looked around the table at each man in turn. And all we need is enough. Cruz finally put his book down on the cushion beside him. He stood up, stretched, and walked over to look at the list. He studied it for a long moment. Bakery on 5th might help, he said. The florist on Main might too, if we explain it right. Then we start there, Duke said. Tomorrow morning, first thing. Monday came in gray and cool, with a thin layer of clouds stretched flat across the sky. Duke was up before 6. He stood at his kitchen window with a mug of coffee and watched the street below slowly wake up. A delivery truck rumbled past. A woman walked a small dog along the sidewalk. A light came on in the apartment building across the way. He drank his coffee standing up. By 7, he was on his bike. He had made a short list the night before. 6 businesses within a few blocks of downtown. Places he thought might listen. He kept the list folded in the front pocket of his jacket and did not look at it again. He had already memorized every name on it. He started with the hardware store on Glendale Street because he knew the owner slightly. Not well, but enough to say hello, without it being awkward. The man's name was Phil. He was in his 60s, stocky, with thick glasses and a gray mustache that had probably looked the same for 30 years. Phil listened. He stood behind his counter with his arms crossed, and his expression polite but careful. When Duke finished explaining, Phil said he appreciated what Duke was trying to do, but that he was not in a position to contribute supplies right now. Business had been slow. He said it without apology, just plainly, the way a man states a fact. Duke thanked him and left. The second stop was a small diner 2 blocks east. The woman at the front said the owner was not in until noon. Duke left his name and a short note explaining what he needed and why. He did not expect a call back. The third stop was a party supply shop on the corner of Main and 4th. A young man barely out of his teens was organizing a shelf near the door when Duke walked in. The young man looked up, and the smile he had ready dropped just slightly before he caught it and straightened it back into place. Duke explained the situation. The young man listened with his hands in his apron pockets. When Duke finished, the young man said he would need to talk to his manager, and that the manager would not be in until Thursday. Duke nodded. Thursday's too late. The party's this week. The young man looked genuinely sorry about that. Duke believed him. But sorry did not move a thing forward. He got back on his bike and sat for a moment at the curb. He was not discouraged exactly. He had expected this. But 4 stops in with nothing to show for it made the size of what he was trying to do feel a little more real. He pulled out the list. One name left that he felt good about. Rosie's Bakery. It sat near the end of Main Street, in a narrow building with yellow trim and a painted window that always had something written on it, in cheerful cursive. That morning it said, "Fresh cinnamon rolls. Come on in." A small bell above the door rang when Duke stepped inside. The smell hit him immediately. Warm bread? Cinnamon. Something with vanilla in it. The kind of smell that made a person feel like they were somewhere safe. A woman came out from the back, wiping her hands on a towel. She was somewhere in her 50s with short dark hair, and flour dusted along one forearm. Her name tag said Rosie in handwritten letters. She looked at Duke without flinching, which he noticed right away. "Help you?" she said. "I hope so," Duke said. He told her everything, not the short version he had given the others. The whole thing. He told her about the parking lot, about the little boy who left a crumpled dollar on his motorcycle, about what Noah had said when Duke asked him why. He told her about the gift that got stolen, and about Maddie's birthday coming fast, and about a mother who was quietly holding everything together while quietly falling apart. Rosie did not interrupt once. When he finished, she set her towel on the counter and looked at him steadily. "How big does the cake need to be?" she said. Word travels fast in a small town. By Tuesday morning, people were already talking. Duke had not said much to anyone beyond the businesses he had visited, but somehow the story had taken on a life of its own. That was the thing about small towns. A whisper in one corner could reach the other side before lunch. By noon, most people on Emily Street had heard some version of it. The versions were not all the same. Some said a group of bikers was throwing a wild party and had picked a random family to use as cover. Some said the Hells Angels were trying to buy their way into the neighborhood for reasons nobody could quite name. One man on the corner of Birch and Elm told his neighbor that he had heard the whole thing was some kind of publicity stunt, and that a news crew was already on their way. None of it was true, but that did not slow any of it down. At the grocery store, two women stood near the bread aisle and spoke in low voices about it. One of them shook her head slowly. "I don't like it," she said. "Those men have no business being around children. I don't care what they say they're doing." The other woman was quieter about it. "I heard the little boy left one of them $1. That's what started the whole thing." She paused. "That's kind of sweet, isn't it?" The first woman picked up a loaf of bread and put it in her cart. "Sweet or not, I wouldn't let my kids anywhere near that party." At the barber shop on 4th Street, the conversation was different. Two older men sat in the waiting chairs, while a third got a trim. One of them had seen Duke earlier that morning, loading bags into the back of a truck with two other club members. "Looked like decorations to me," the man said. "Streamers, that kind of thing." The barber raised an eyebrow, but kept his scissors moving. "People change," the man in the waiting chair said simply. "Maybe," said the barber. "Maybe not." By late afternoon, the talk had reached Emily's front porch. Her neighbor Carol was the one who brought it. Carol was well-meaning and had lived 3 houses down for 11 years. She stood at Emily's door with a covered plate of brownies and a look on her face that said the brownies were only part of the reason she had come. Emily invited her in. They sat at the kitchen table while Noah drew pictures in the living room, and Maddie read upstairs. Carol set the plate down and folded her hands on top of it. "I heard something today," she began carefully. Emily nodded. "About the bikers." Carol looked relieved that she did not have to ease into it. "So you know." "I heard a little." Emily wrapped both hands around her mug. "Someone mentioned it at work this morning." Carol leaned forward slightly. "Emily, I just want to make sure you're being careful. I know things have been hard, and I know people mean well, but—" She paused. "These aren't exactly the kind of people you want around your kids, especially Maddie. You know how she is. Impressionable." Emily looked down at her mug. "I'm not saying they're bad people necessarily," Carol continued. "I just think you have to ask yourself what they want out of this. People don't do something for nothing." Emily was quiet for a moment. "Noah left one of them $1, she said softly. Carol blinked. "What?" "In the parking lot." He left $1 on the man's motorcycle. Emily shook her head slowly. I didn't even know he'd done it until a few days later. Carol sat back. She did not seem to know what to do with that. After Carol left, Emily stood at the kitchen window. Outside, the late afternoon light was turning the yard gold. She could hear Noah in the next room, the scratch of his crayon on paper, the soft sound of him humming something she did not recognize. She pressed her fingers against the cool glass and stared at nothing in particular. She honestly did not know what to do. Duke was up before the sun on Tuesday. He sat at the small table in his kitchen with a cup of black coffee and a handwritten list in front of him. The list had grown since Sunday. What had started as a few bullet points was now 2 full pages, front and back. Food, decorations, music, gifts, people to call, favors to ask, favors to return. He studied the list in the quiet of the early morning. The apartment around him was spare. A worn couch, a shelf with a few books, and a motorcycle manual. A single framed photo on the wall near the door. He did not look at the photo often, but this morning, his eyes drifted to it without meaning to. It was a girl, maybe 8 years old in the picture. Dark hair pulled into 2 crooked pigtails. A gap where her front tooth used to be. She was laughing at something outside the frame. Something that had made her throw her whole head back. Her name was Kara. Duke looked at the photo for a long moment, then looked back at his list. He drank the rest of his coffee standing up, pulled on his jacket, and headed out into the cool morning air. His first stop was the hardware store on Maple Street. He needed string lights and a hand pump for balloons. The man behind the counter was named Gerald. Gerald had known Duke for years. Not well, but enough to nod when he walked in. Duke laid his list on the counter and explained what he needed. Gerald listened without interrupting. Then he walked the aisles with Duke and helped him find everything. At the register, Gerald looked at the total and then looked at Duke. He paused. Then he took 20% off without saying a word about it. Duke nodded once. Appreciate it. Gerald nodded back. Kid's got a birthday coming up. That's worth something. From the hardware store, Duke rode to the community center on the east side of town. He had heard through one of his club brothers that a man named Ray sometimes volunteered there. Ray had a sound system he used for events and had loaned it out before. Duke did not know Ray personally. He found Ray in the back room of the community center, untangling a mess of cables with the patience of a man who had done it 100 times. Ray was somewhere in his 60s, with a white mustache and the kind of steady hands that came from years of careful work. Duke introduced himself. He explained what he was putting together. Ray looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Duke had learned to be still in those moments. He used to fill silences. Now he let them breathe. Finally, Ray said, "What's the little girl's name?" "Maddie," Duke said. Ray nodded slowly. He set the cables down on the table beside him. "My granddaughter's name is Maddie." He was quiet again for a second. "You can have the system for the day. I'll set it up myself." Duke thanked him and meant it. He was back on his bike by mid-morning, moving through the familiar streets of town with his next stop already in mind. The wind was cool against his face. The engine hummed steadily beneath him. He rode the long way around the south end of town, past the park, past the elementary school, past the row of houses where the yards were small but tidy. He was not sure why he went that way. He just did. At a red light near the park, a little girl about 8 years old crossed the street ahead of him with her mother. Dark hair, bright jacket. She was skipping. Duke watched her until the light changed. He thought about Kara. He thought about the years that had slipped past, the choices that had piled up like stones until the wall between them was too tall to see over. He had told himself for a long time that some things could not be undone, that some people were just too far gone to deserve a second look from the world. He had believed that about himself for a long time. But something had shifted since Saturday, since a 7-year-old boy had left a crumpled dollar on his motorcycle and looked up at him with completely honest eyes and said, "Maybe you need it more than we do." Duke pulled through the intersection. This was not just about a birthday party anymore. He understood that now. He was not sure exactly when it had stopped being about the party. Maybe it had never been only about that. Maybe from the very first moment he had read that note on his handlebar, some quiet part of him had recognized what this really was. A chance, not to fix everything. He was not foolish enough to think one birthday party could undo years of distance and silence and regret. But a chance to prove something. Not to the town, not even to Noah or Maddie or Emily. To himself. Duke turned onto the main road and headed toward his next stop. The list was still long. There was still a lot of work to do. He was not going to stop until it was done. By Wednesday morning, the list had taken on a life of its own. Duke had expected to make a few calls, maybe knock on a few doors. He had expected most of them to go unanswered. What he had not expected was for people to start calling him. It started with the bakery. Linda Chen, the owner who had donated supplies on Monday, had apparently told her neighbor. Her neighbor had told someone at the church on Birch Street, and the woman at the church had called the community center. By the time Duke sat down with his coffee at 7 in the morning, his phone had already buzzed 4 times. A florist on 2nd Avenue wanted to donate flowers and balloon arrangements. A grocery store manager offered to provide drinks and paper goods. A retired schoolteacher named Dorothy said she had tablecloths and folding chairs stored in her garage, and that Duke was welcome to every last one of them. Duke stared at his phone for a moment after reading through the messages. Then he wrote everything down on the list. The veterans came on Wednesday afternoon. Duke had mentioned the party in passing to a man named Hector at the gas station. Hector had served 2 tours overseas and now spent his Wednesdays volunteering at the VFW Hall 3 blocks from the park. Within 2 hours, Hector showed up at the community center with 4 other veterans behind him. They did not ask many questions. They just asked where to start. Duke showed them the empty space behind the community center where the party would be held. It was a wide-open area, with a low concrete wall on one side, and a stretch of grass that needed cleaning up. The veterans looked at it the way men who had seen real problems look at small ones. "We can work with this," Hector said simply. They spent the afternoon hauling debris, leveling a patch of ground, and stacking donated chairs into neat rows. Duke worked alongside them without a word, and they worked alongside him the same way. By sunset, the space looked like a different place entirely. Thursday brought even more. A group from the church on Birch Street arrived with homemade decorations, paper stars, hand-painted banners in bright colors, long strings of ribbon tied into neat bows. An older woman named Agnes directed the whole effort with a quiet authority that made even the biggest volunteers listen carefully. A local mechanic named Pete, who had heard about Emily's broken car through the neighborhood grapevine, called Duke directly and said he would handle the car for free. Duke had not asked him. Pete had simply decided. 2 members of the Iron Saints, Ricky and a quiet giant everyone called Bear, spent Thursday driving across town in a borrowed truck to pick up donations. By early afternoon, the truck had been loaded and unloaded twice. Food, decorations, wrapped gifts from people who had never even met Maddie, but had heard the story and wanted to be part of it. By Thursday evening, the community center courtyard had been almost completely transformed. The string lights were up. The tables were covered. The sound system sat ready in the corner where Ray had carefully placed it that afternoon. The smell of baked goods drifted from 2 folding tables near the far wall. Duke stood in the middle of it all as the last of the volunteers headed home for the night. The space was quiet now. Still. The lights glowed softly in the evening air. He turned slowly and looked at everything they had built in just a few days. Dozens of people, dozens of separate lives, none of them connected in any obvious way, all somehow pulled together by a single crumpled dollar bill and a 7-year-old boy's pure heart. It was more than he had imagined. Much more. He pulled out his list and looked it over one final time. He crossed off the last few items slowly, one by one. Then he folded the paper, held it in his hand, and for the first time since Sunday, Duke felt afraid. Not of the work. The work was done. He was afraid of what happened if this still was not enough. Friday arrived the way important days always do. Quietly, without ceremony. Just the sun coming up slow over the rooftops and birds making noise outside the window, like they had no idea what was about to happen. Duke was already awake before the sun got there. He had his boots on by 5:30. His coffee was barely touched. He grabbed the folded list from the counter and walked out into the cool morning air. The community center courtyard looked different in the early light. The decorations were still up from the night before, but in the gray of early morning they looked almost fragile. Paper stars, ribbon bows, hand-painted banners, all of it quietly waiting. Duke walked through the space slowly. He checked the tables. He checked the chairs. He adjusted a string of lights that had come slightly loose from the post near the far wall. Ricky arrived around 6 with a truck full of food from the grocery store donation. Canned drinks on ice, plates of covered food from Linda's bakery, wrapped carefully in clear packaging, a large box of fruit that someone from the church had added at the last minute. Bear arrived shortly after and began unloading without needing to be asked. By 8 in the morning, a quiet, steady stream of people were moving in and out of the courtyard. Dorothy from the church carried in a second load of folding chairs. Hector and 2 other veterans set up the long serving tables along the left wall and covered them with the white tablecloths they had ironed the evening before. Agnes directed the decoration finishing touches with the same calm authority she had shown on Thursday. Duke moved through all of it like a man doing arithmetic in his head, checking things off, adjusting, making sure nothing was missing. The gifts were organized around 11. They were arranged on a separate table near the back wall, wrapped presents of all sizes, bags with colored tissue paper stuffed inside, a few flat packages tied with ribbon. The people of town had been generous in a way that Duke had not fully seen coming, even after all the donations of the week. He stood in front of the gift table for a long moment. He thought about the bicycle that had been donated by a retired man named Earl, who ran a small repair shop on the edge of town. It was powder blue. It had a white basket on the front. Earl had cleaned it up, oiled the chain, and wrapped a ribbon around the handlebars before dropping it off Thursday evening. Duke had leaned it carefully against the wall behind the gift table, so it would be the first thing Maddie saw when she walked toward it. He thought about the books that had been donated by the woman at the library. 3 of them, wrapped together in brown paper with a small bow on top. He thought about all the small things on that table that people had given without being asked, without knowing Maddie, without needing anything in return. He straightened a few of the packages and then stepped back. By late Friday night, the last volunteer had gone home. The courtyard was still and quiet. The string lights were still on, casting a soft, warm glow across the tables and decorations. The food was covered and ready. The gift table sat full and waiting. The bicycle leaned against the wall with its ribbon still neat. Duke stood alone in the middle of the space. He turned slowly, took in all of it, the banners, the balloons, the tables dressed in white, the small handmade details that dozens of different hands had contributed across the week. All of it for a 12-year-old girl who had no idea any of this existed. A girl who had woken up every day that week believing nobody had remembered. Duke stood very still. He thought about Maddie, about what it would feel like to step outside and find all of this waiting, to realize that a whole community had shown up for you. He hoped she would feel it. He really hoped she would feel it. All of it. Every single bit. Maddie woke up slowly. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The light coming through the curtain was soft and pale. Outside, A bird was singing. A car passed on the street somewhere far away. Then she remembered what day it was. She closed her eyes again. She did not want to make a big deal of it. That was the thing about being 12, almost 13. You understood things better than you did when you were little. You understood that wanting things cost money. That money was something her mother worried about every single day. That it was not fair to pile more worry on top of worry just because the calendar said it was your birthday. Maddie understood all of that. So she lay there quietly and told herself it was just a regular Saturday. She would help with breakfast. She would be cheerful. She would not mention it unless someone else did first. She would not make her mother feel bad. She was good at that, swallowing things down and smiling anyway. She got dressed in her usual jeans and a soft green sweater that had been her dad's favorite color. She stood at the small mirror above her dresser and ran a brush through her hair. Her reflection looked back at her, calm, steady, the same face she showed everyone. She took one slow breath and went downstairs. The kitchen smelled like toast and something sweet. Emily was standing at the stove, her back turned, moving quietly. Noah was already at the table. He had a glass of orange juice in front of him, and he was sitting very still, which for Noah was unusual. He was almost buzzing. Maddie noticed it right away. His eyes were bright. His hands were folded on the table in a way that looked like he was trying very hard to seem normal. She looked at him for a second. He looked back, and then immediately looked down at his orange juice, like it was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. Maddie said nothing. She pulled out her chair and sat down. "Morning," she said. "Morning," Noah said. Very casual. Too casual. Emily turned from the stove with a plate of toast and set it on the table. She bent down and kissed the top of Maddie's head. "Happy birthday, baby," she said softly. Her voice was steady, but Maddie caught the look that crossed her mother's face right after. Just a flicker. A tightness around the eyes. Something Emily was working very hard to keep hidden. Maddie smiled up at her. "Thanks, Mom." "I made your favorite," Emily said, nodding toward the stove. "Scrambled eggs with the cheese on top." "That sounds perfect," Maddie said. And she meant it. She really meant it. Emily moved back to the stove and turned her face away. She pressed her lips together, stared at the eggs in the pan. She gave them a slow stir, even though they did not need it. She had been awake since before 5. She had sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and thought about every birthday she had been able to give her daughter before everything changed. The cakes, the small pile of wrapped gifts on the table, the way Maddie used to run downstairs with her hair wild and her eyes wide. This year, there was toast and eggs and a card Emily had bought at the dollar store and signed with love. She knew it was enough. She told herself it was enough. But the guilt sat heavy in her chest anyway. It did not ask permission. It just sat there, quiet and stubborn, pressing down while she stirred eggs that did not need stirring and blinked hard at the stove. Across the table, Noah stared into his orange juice and pressed his lips tight together to keep his smile from getting too big. He knew something his mother did not know. He knew something his sister did not know. And keeping it inside felt like trying to hold a balloon underwater. The afternoon settled over the house like a warm blanket. After breakfast, Emily had kept things simple. She made sandwiches for lunch. They watched a movie together on the couch, the three of them tucked in close with a bowl of popcorn in the middle. Maddie sat between her mother and Noah with her feet pulled up beneath her. It was nice. Quiet and ordinary and nice. Maddie told herself she was happy. She almost believed it. Around 2 o'clock, Emily glanced at the clock on the wall and then looked at Noah. Noah looked back. Something passed between them. Maddie caught it and frowned slightly. "You okay?" she asked Noah. "Yep," he said. He grabbed a handful of popcorn and shoved it in his mouth. Maddie looked at her mother. Emily was already looking at the television again, her face smooth and calm. Maddie let it go. The movie ended. Noah asked if he could go check the mailbox. Emily said sure. He disappeared out the front door fast, like he had been waiting for permission to move. Maddie watched him go and said nothing. She helped Emily carry the popcorn bowl to the kitchen. She washed it in the sink, while Emily wiped down the counter beside her. They worked quietly together the way they always did. Comfortable, easy. "You doing okay today?" Emily asked. "I'm good, Mom," Maddie said. Emily reached over and squeezed her shoulder. "I love you so much. You know that." Maddie smiled. "I know." She turned back to the sink and stared at the soapy water. She was doing okay. She really was. She just did not expect anything. That was the key. If you did not expect anything, you could not be disappointed. She had learned that lesson the careful way. Then she heard it. It was low at first. A distant rumble, like thunder rolling in from somewhere far away. But the sky outside the kitchen window was perfectly blue, not a cloud in sight. Maddie turned off the faucet. She stood still and listened. The sound grew. It was not thunder. It was engines, deep and powerful and getting louder by the second. Many of them, all together. Maddie dried her hands on the dish towel slowly. Emily had gone very quiet beside her. Maddie glanced over and saw her mother pressing both hands flat against the counter. Her eyes were bright. Her lips were pressed together in a thin line, like she was holding something in. "Mom," Maddie said. "Go check on your brother," Emily said softly. Her voice sounded strange. Full. Maddie set the dish towel on the counter. She walked through the living room and reached the front door. The rumbling was loud now. She could feel it in the floor beneath her feet. It vibrated in her chest like a second heartbeat. She put her hand on the door handle. She opened the door. The light hit her first. Bright afternoon sun flooding the whole street. Then, the rest of it hit her all at once. And she stopped breathing. The street was filled with motorcycles. Big, gleaming ones parked in 2 long rows, all the way down the block. Between them and beyond them stood people. Dozens of them. Neighbors she recognized from church. Veterans in their caps and jackets. Families with little kids on their hips. Business owners she had seen downtown. People she had never met standing right alongside people she had known her whole life. There were streamers tied to mailboxes in purple and gold. Balloons clustered at the end of the driveway, bouncing in the light breeze. Folding tables lined the sidewalk covered in food and decorations. Music played from somewhere. Warm and bright and real. Noah stood at the bottom of the porch steps. He was grinning so wide his whole face looked like it might split open. His arms were spread out to the sides, like he was presenting the greatest thing in the world. Because he was. Maddie stared. Her mouth opened. No words came out. Her eyes filled with tears. Maddie stood on the porch steps for a long moment. She could not move. She could only stare at everything spread out before her. The color, the people, the noise and warmth of it all rushing toward her like a wave. Then, Noah ran up the steps and grabbed her hand. "Come on," he said. "It's all for you." She let him pull her forward. The next hour felt like something out of a dream. People Maddie recognized came up one by one and wished her happy birthday. Mrs. Calloway from the end of the block squeezed both her hands. Mr. and Mrs. Ruiz from the church choir smiled and handed her a small card. 2 girls from her class at school ran over giggling and pulled her toward a table covered in games. Somebody had set up a ring toss with little prizes. Somebody else had arranged a table full of craft supplies where younger kids sat making birthday cards. A man Maddie did not know stood behind a portable grill flipping burgers, laughing loudly at something the man beside him just said. The smell of the food drifted across the whole yard, warm and savory and wonderful. Music played from a sound system set up near the garage, something upbeat and cheerful that made the little kids on the sidewalk start bouncing on their feet without even meaning to. Maddie moved through it all in a happy daze. Emily came down the porch steps slowly. She had both hands pressed to her cheeks. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling wider than Maddie had seen her smile in a very long time. Several neighbors came over to hug her. She hugged them back hard. Noah stayed close to Maddie the whole time, beaming like he had personally hung the sun in the sky. A woman from the bakery on Main Street carried a cake out through the crowd on a wide flatboard. It was a 2-layer cake with white frosting and purple flowers piped carefully around the edges. In the center, in neat looping letters, it read, "Happy Birthday, Maddie." The crowd parted to let her through. People started clapping. Maddie pressed her hand over her mouth. The food tables were full. Someone had donated a big tray of sandwiches. There were chips and fruit, and a cooler packed with drinks. An older woman Maddie did not recognize had brought a large pan of brownies wrapped in foil. She lifted the edge of the foil and winked at Maddie when she walked by. Kids chased each other through the grass. Veterans sat together in lawn chairs talking and laughing quietly. Neighbors who had probably never spoken to each other stood side by side, eating and chatting like old friends. The whole street felt alive. After a while, the music faded down just a little. Duke stepped forward from where he had been standing near the motorcycles. He was a big man, wide shoulders, a heavy leather vest with patches on the front. His face was rough and weathered, the face of someone who had lived a hard life and carried the weight of it. But the way he walked toward Maddie was careful, almost gentle. He was holding a large box, wrapped in shiny purple paper. 2 other club members stood behind him, carrying additional bags. The crowd grew a little quieter. Duke stopped in front of Maddie and crouched down slightly so he was closer to her eye level. "Happy birthday," he said. His voice was low and gruff, but it was kind. He held out the box. Maddie took it with both hands. She set it carefully on the table beside her and opened the paper slowly, like she was afraid it might disappear if she moved too fast. Inside was a brand new bicycle helmet in her favorite color, a set of books she had been wanting, and a small jewelry box with a delicate silver bracelet inside. She looked up at Duke. Her eyes were full of tears again. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she looked out at everyone gathered around her. Her voice got stronger. "Thank you, all of you." The sun was getting low. The sky had turned a soft shade of orange and pink above the rooftops, and the air had cooled just enough to feel comfortable. The music was still playing, but softer now. Most of the adults had settled into small groups, talking and laughing in the fading light. The younger kids had slowed down too, worn out from hours of running and playing. Maddie sat at the center table surrounded by her friends, still glowing. Noah had slipped away from the crowd quietly. He sat on the curb at the far edge of the yard, near the row of parked motorcycles. He was not sad. He just needed a moment alone with his thoughts. Sometimes he got that way. His mother always said he was an old soul. He was staring at the sidewalk when he heard heavy boots on the pavement. He looked up. Duke lowered himself onto the curb beside him. It took a second. Duke was a big man, and the curb was low. But he settled there without complaint and rested his forearms on his knees. For a moment, neither of them said anything. A breeze moved through the street. Somewhere behind them, someone laughed at something. The smell of the grill still hung in the warm air. "You doing okay, kid?" Duke asked. Noah nodded. "Yeah, I was just thinking." "About what?" Noah was quiet for a second. "About my dad." Duke did not say anything right away. He just nodded slowly, like he understood that some things needed space before you could talk about them. "He would have liked today," Noah said. "He always said people are mostly good. You just have to give them a chance to show it." Duke looked out at the street. His jaw shifted. "Sounds like he was a smart man." "He was." Noah picked at a loose thread on his shoelace. "He died when I was 4. I don't remember everything about him, but I remember the way he talked. Kind of quiet, like he meant every word. "That's a good thing to remember," Duke said. Noah looked up at him. "Do you have a dad?" Duke almost smiled. "Had one. Long time ago." "Was he good?" Duke thought about it honestly. "Sometimes. Not always. But I think he did his best." Noah nodded like that was a fair answer. A car rolled slowly down the street, the driver smiling and waving at the gathering as he passed. Duke raised a hand back without thinking about it. Noah watched him do it. Then, he reached into the front pocket of his jeans. He dug carefully, the way you dig for something small and important that you do not want to drop. When he pulled his hand out, he was holding two things. One was a crumpled dollar bill. It was old and soft from being folded and unfolded many times. The edges were worn thin. It looked like it had passed through a lot of hands over a lot of years. The other was a tiny piece of paper. It had been folded into a small square, and the creases were deep, like it had been opened and closed 100 times. Noah held both of them out toward Duke. "The dollar the first left on your bike," Noah said. "It wasn't mine. I mean, I didn't earn it or anything. I found it." Duke looked down at the dollar and the little folded note. "Found it where?" he asked. "In my dad's old jacket." Noah's voice stayed steady, but something in his eyes went soft. "My mom keeps his stuff in the closet. She let me have his jacket last winter because I was cold, and I found these inside the pocket." He pressed the small folded note into Duke's hand. "There was this note with it," Noah said simply. Duke unfolded it carefully. The paper was thin and a little fragile, like it might tear if he was not gentle. He held it close in the low orange light of the setting sun and read the 4 small words written there in faded ink. "Pass kindness forward." Duke stared at the note. He did not move. He did not speak. He just sat there on that curb with the tiny piece of paper resting in his rough, scarred fingers, while the sounds of the party carried on softly behind him. Pass kindness forward. 4 words, faded ink, worn paper. Something inside his chest tightened in a way he had not felt in a very long time. Noah was watching him. The boy did not say anything. He seemed to understand without being told that this was one of those moments that needed quiet. Duke read the words again, and again. His throat felt thick. His eyes stayed fixed on the paper, but he was not really seeing it anymore. He was somewhere else entirely. He was somewhere far back, somewhere he had not visited in a long, long time. He was 17 years old again. It was winter, real winter, the kind with bitter wind that cut right through you. He had been standing outside a gas station on the edge of a town he did not belong in, wearing a jacket that was too thin for the cold. He had just had a fight with his father, a bad one, the kind that ends with a door slamming so hard the windows shake. He had walked out with nothing, no plan, no money, no idea where he was going. He remembered how the pavement felt under his boots, hard and cold. He remembered staring at the road and thinking that nobody in the world would notice if he just kept walking and never came back. And then an old man had appeared beside him. Duke could still picture him clearly even now, small and thin, with a white beard and a dark coat. He had kind eyes, the sort of eyes that did not judge you, the sort of eyes that looked at you like you were worth something, even when you had given the world every reason to think otherwise. The old man had not asked questions. He had not given a speech. He had simply reached into his coat pocket and pressed a dollar bill into Duke's hand. Duke had looked down at it, confused. Folded around the dollar was a tiny piece of paper, the same 4 words. Pass kindness forward. Duke had looked up to say something, but the old man had already turned and walked away. Just like that. No explanation, no name. He was there, and then he was gone. Duke had stood in that cold for a long time holding that dollar. Something about it had cracked him open in a way he could not explain. Not because of the money. $1 did not fix anything. He knew that, even at 17. But because someone had seen him standing there, in the cold, and had chosen to stop, had chosen to offer something, instead of walking past. It was the first time in a long time that he had felt like a person. He kept that dollar for years, and though life pulled him in hard directions, though he made mistakes and lost things and became someone he was not always proud of, that memory had stayed with him. It had been the reason he made at least one good choice during a time when bad ones were everywhere. Just one. But sometimes one is enough to change the road you are on. Over time, the memory had faded. He had forgotten the feeling. He had buried it under years of noise and regret, and the heavy weight of who he had become. But now here it was. The same 4 words, in the same faded ink, on the same thin, worn paper, carried across time by a man he never met, and passed at last by a 7-year-old boy with kind eyes, and a crumpled dollar he had found in a dead man's jacket. Duke closed his fingers gently around the note. He breathed in slowly through his nose, and let the air out, quiet and long. The lesson had come back. After all these years of distance and noise and forgetting, it had found its way back to him. Not through something grand or dramatic, but through a child sitting on a curb just wanting to help. The sun was getting low. The sky had turned soft shades of orange and pink above the rooftops, and the air had cooled just enough to feel comfortable. Children were still laughing near the food tables. Neighbors stood in small groups talking. The bikers leaned against their motorcycles with cups in their hands, easy and relaxed in a way that would have surprised anyone who had seen them at the start of the week. Duke stood up slowly from the curb. He looked down at Noah. "Hey," he said quietly, "I need to tell everybody something. That okay with you?" Noah looked up at him with those steady brown eyes. He nodded. Duke gave the boy a single nod back. Then he walked toward the center of the street, where the celebration had been unfolding all afternoon. He moved slowly, but purposefully, the way a man moves when he has made up his mind about something and is not going to talk himself out of it. He stopped near the folding table where the birthday cake had been. A few people noticed him standing there and went quiet. Others turned when they felt the shift in the air. Duke cleared his throat. "Can I get everybody's attention for a minute?" The voices around him faded. The music lowered. People turned toward him. Neighbors and bikers and veterans and church members and families all looked at the big man standing in the middle of the street, holding a tiny piece of paper. Duke was not a man who gave speeches. He was not the kind of person who liked all eyes on him for reasons other than staying out of his way. He felt the discomfort of it rise in his chest. But he thought about that old man in the cold. He thought about 17-year-old Duke Harrison standing on an empty road feeling like nobody. He thought about Noah. He started talking. He told them about the parking lot, about coming back to his motorcycle and finding that crumpled dollar tucked under the handlebar. He told them how his first thought was that someone was messing with him, how he had looked around the lot ready to be angry about it. And then he told them about the boy. He kept his voice steady as he described Noah, explaining that maybe Duke needed the dollar more than they did. A few people in the crowd looked over at Noah, who was standing quietly beside his mother. Emily had her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Then Duke held up the small piece of paper. "This note was folded around that dollar," he said. Noah found it inside his dad's old jacket. He read it aloud. "Pass kindness forward." The crowd was still. Duke let those 4 words sit for a moment before he kept going. He told them about being 17, about the fight with his father, and the cold road, and the empty feeling of believing nobody cared whether he existed. He told them about the old man, about the dollar that appeared out of nowhere, about reading those same 4 words for the first time on a piece of paper outside a gas station in the middle of winter. His voice got rough near the end of it. He did not try to hide that. "That one moment," he said, "made me feel like a person again. Made me choose different than I was about to choose. I forgot about it for a long time." He paused. Noah brought it back. Silence held the street for a long beat. Then someone started clapping. slowly at first. Then more hands joined in. Then more. The sound grew until it filled the whole block. A few people were wiping their eyes. A veteran near the back took off his hat and held it against his chest. One of the Iron Saints, a big man named Richie, who never showed much of anything on his face, was staring at the ground and blinking hard. Emily pulled Noah close against her side. Maddie stood with both hands over her mouth. Then voices began rising from the crowd. One at a time at first. A neighbor, a church member, a young mother holding a toddler on her hip. "I want to do that." "Me too." "Tell me how." More voices followed. People calling out with genuine feeling, not because they felt they should, but because something real had moved through them, and they wanted to hold on to it. 3 weeks passed. The leaves on the oak trees along Main Street had turned a deeper shade of green, and the summer felt full and warm and alive in a way that matched the mood of the town. Something had shifted after Maddie's birthday. It was hard to name exactly, but people noticed it the way you notice when a window gets opened in a stuffy room. The air just felt different. The first Pass Kindness Forward Day arrived on a Saturday morning. It started simply. A few folding tables set up along the sidewalk outside the community center. Some handmade signs taped to lampposts. A banner stretched between 2 poles that a group of church volunteers had painted by hand the week before. The letters were slightly uneven, but bold and bright. Pass Kindness Forward Day. By 9 in the morning, the street was filling up. Families came with their children. Veterans showed up in small groups, some wearing old jackets with patches on the sleeves. Business owners propped their doors open and put welcome signs in their windows. The bakery that had donated supplies for Maddie's party set out free muffins on a table by the door. The Iron Saints arrived together. Their motorcycles rolled down Main Street in a slow, steady line, and this time, nobody stepped back onto the curb or pulled their children close. A few kids actually ran to the edge of the sidewalk to watch. One little girl waved at Richie, who looked surprised for just a second before lifting his big hand and waving back. Duke parked his motorcycle near the end of the block and climbed off. He stood for a moment and looked at all of it. The tables, the people, the noise and the movement and the color of it. He had not expected any of this when he walked out of a hardware store 3 weeks ago and found a crumpled dollar under his handlebar. Noah was there with Emily and Maddie. Maddie had volunteered to help organize a gift wrapping station where people could bring donations and wrap them for families who were going through hard times. She worked carefully and cheerfully, cutting paper and tying ribbons, talking with anyone who came by. She looked like a completely different person than the girl who had woken up on her birthday expecting nothing. Emily spent the morning helping serve food. A mechanic named Gary, the same man who had fixed her car the week before, stopped by to say hello. They talked for a long time, easy and comfortable, the way neighbors talk when they have stopped being strangers. Noah did what he always did. He watched everything. He noticed people. He paid attention to small moments that others walked right past. He saw an old man standing alone near the edge of the sidewalk, looking unsure about whether he belonged there. And Noah walked over and stood beside him until a veteran came and struck up a conversation, and the old man smiled for the first time all morning. Late in the afternoon, Duke found Noah near the edge of the celebration. "Want to see something?" Duke asked. Noah looked up at him. "Yeah." They walked together 2 blocks down from Main Street to the Iron Saints clubhouse. It was a low brick building with a metal door and a small gravel lot out front. Noah had never been inside before. Duke held the door open, and Noah walked in ahead of him. The main room smelled like coffee and motor oil. A few members were inside talking. They nodded when Duke came in. Duke led Noah to the far wall. Hanging there, inside a simple wooden frame with a clean piece of glass over it, was the crumpled dollar bill. and beside it, also framed, was the small faded note. Pass kindness forward. Noah stared at it for a long moment. We put it up the day after the party, Duke said. Figured it belonged somewhere people could see it. Noah stepped a little closer to the glass. Duke crouched down beside him so they were at the same level. You know what that dollar did? Duke said quietly. Noah shook his head. Duke looked at the frame on the wall. It changed this whole town, buddy. One crumpled dollar, and a 7-year-old kid who thought somebody else might need it more than he did. He paused. That's all it took. Noah was quiet for a moment. He kept looking at the framed note. Dad always said little things matter, Noah said softly. Duke nodded slowly. Your dad was right. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.